Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yep.
Can you hear me?
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, can you hear me
Thanks.
as well. Cool.
I'm just going to get the presentation up on the screen. So yes, my name is Neha, and this is Marcel. We're both consultants at a consultancy called Equal Experts. And we've sort of found ourselves in a really interesting position a couple of times over the past few years where we've been working on DevOps transformation projects or continuous delivery transformation projects. And what's been really interesting for us is that although these are inherently technical programs of work, our clients have actually been really open to the idea of having product managers like us integrally kind of involved in the teams, sort of shaping the focus of the program and shaping like the kind of products that we kind of develop. So what we wanted to do today is actually share some of the stories that we have, some of the learnings that we have from having worked on some of these projects. And we also wanted to share some of the core tools that we have in our product management toolkit that we feel have kind of added value, but we also could have used better to kind of avoid some of the issues that we kind of came across in some of these programs of work. But before we go into that, what we probably need to do is first at least talk about what is it that we mean when we talk about DevOps, just to make sure we're all kind of talking about the same thing.
So there is kind of a perception in the industry sometimes that DevOps is just historically, if we look at kind of where this came from, infrastructure and system administration and those things, that is something that happens under the hood, that happens in a basement, that is very focused on technical, but the technical discipline only, that it's kind of leaning towards the delivery capability of a team or an organization. And we really feel that we need to think and reposition this to be more strategic capability. And we'll explain this in a second a little bit more why this is. The reason why we want to reposition this is it's a point of view, how we all work together as product people, as DevOps consultants, as software engineers, QA, everyone in an organization or a business. But also because really, ultimately, as an organization, we think you can get competitive advantage out of strategic capabilities, specifically DevOps capabilities. So if you think of organizations, what do they want to do? They all want to deliver more value, faster, more reliable, at pace, at higher levels of quality, more efficiently, right? That's what we effectively all want to do. And that is or can be a source of competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. To give a couple of examples, I guess.
Yeah, so one of our clients, for example, it was a fintech startup in a fairly sort of new market. So there weren't other fintech startups in that market yet. And they were able to launch 2 whole financial products before their competition. So having that early mover advantage meant that they were able to raise more money from their investors as well. They actually had a user base that they could then convert to each subsequent financial product that they onboarded. And it was just a win-win story sort of for the company.
Mm. Another one of our clients, medical company in Germany, heavily regulated environment. I think they were releasing maximum like 2 to maybe 4 times a year, mainly due to having to satisfy heavy regulatory concerns. So whenever they were making changes to software, so we're talking here software for CT scanners, MRI scanners, and these kind of things. Whenever they were making changes to the software, then they had to create these heavy packs of documentation that had to be given to a regulator, some kind of MOT type organization, think FDA or MHRA, to get the software change approved. And we were able to kind of, by using automation techniques, etc., to bring down the effort and shorten the kind of cycle and lead time for these things considerably. So they now can release software much faster.
Mm-hmm. And like another sort of example is kind of around, I guess it's a bit more defensive, kind of thinking about your business. And obviously we need to protect the business as well, right? We all make mistakes. There's always bugs out there in production. And there was a really good example from Tesla. They had a dog mode. I don't know if you're familiar with the dog mode. It was actually a brilliant idea where you can avoid your dog from overheating and dying in your car by actually setting your Tesla on dog mode. However, there was a bug with it. So because of this bug, your dog could actually die. So pretty dire consequences. And as soon as Tesla were aware of this, within a day, they were able to kind of roll out a change and fix that bug straight away. So again, you can think about it from a business perspective, and you're protecting your business from all the reputational damage of being a car killer or a dog killer company. But there's also like the more important aspect, which is that you're also meeting the needs of your users, to tie in with what Helen was talking about earlier on today.
Cool.
Right. So
you go on.
yeah. So So generally when we kind of think about DevOps, we tend to, or as a capability, we think about, shipping product. So we think about having an idea, turning it into a product and meeting some sort of an outcome for our users. And that is super important, absolutely. However, what we want to do is we want to kind of extend it and think about it as a strategic capability. And what that means is we need to shift our thinking a little bit and think a little bit more about end-to-end value. So we need to be thinking, okay, it's not just about the idea and it's not just about having users use something that's going to solve their problems, but let's get the feedback from that and then push that through that pipeline again to see if we can continue to solve these problems in a smooth way. And then the second aspect, which was also covered in Helen's talk a little bit earlier, is about being user-centric. So we need to understand who our users are within our organization, but then also those outside of the organization, because people both within and outside of our organizations are leveraging and benefiting from this strategic capability. So for example, we might have delivery teams for sure who are using delivery pipelines, they're internal users, but we also have compliance people internally. We've got people outside of the company, like the regulators in Marcel's example, who rely on the documentation that our pipelines generate in order to confirm that we are going to actually have safe products for users to use. And the sort of third aspect that we think we need to focus on is sort of being a little bit more sort of business focused. And this is kind of about understanding what can we actually do as a business, because every business is a little bit different. We've got different capabilities, we've got different challenges, our cultures are different. And so the way in which we would kind of go about setting up this capability would have to be fundamentally different for each of our businesses.
And I think this is a really good point. So if we look at this, and to Neha's point, the value chain for many organizations looks different. Businesses have different goals, different objectives, and not every business has the same level of maturity, right? So when we design infrastructure, DevOps capabilities, pipelines, if you like, to mention something very concrete, they don't need all the same things. They need very different things depending on where they are in their journey, what they want to achieve, what industry they are in. So an important thing here is really one size does not fit all. So we can't just lift and shift DevOps capabilities from one organization to the other, which then gave us the kind of thought that, hang on, there is something missing, because we wouldn't just lift and shift product thinking from one company to the other in the same kind of ways. And in the say, normal product space, consumer-facing products, for instance, we have kind of cracked this, because this is where product thinking comes in, and we just felt that in the DevOps space, that just wasn't, at least the teams we were working with, that just wasn't there. So hence this kind of thinking and this talk. So maybe to bring this down to some examples. So we're mixing here two briefs from two clients just to make it more interesting. Think of an industry where, again, heavily regulated, a medical client producing software for medical devices, or a financial client, someone falling under PCI DSS compliance, so credit card related information that you have to protect and treat in a certain way. Both companies gave us briefs to say, well, we have software already, we're building, we're delivering, but it's not going as well as it should be. We're a bit slower than the competitors. We have a bit of quality issues. We feel we could be doing better. And we went to a conference called QCon, and we saw these guys talk about DevOps, and we think DevOps is kind of the thing that will help us, give us some DevOps, give us some transformation in that area. And we're like, well, we can certainly help with that. But because these both clients came at this from a very technical perspective, their first brief is like, speak to our technical team, see how you can help them. So that's what our teams did. What we did was we kind of helped them with all the good stuff of setting up containerization and the CI/CD pipeline and all these things. But what we could have possibly done a bit more was to look at what the compliance department required. So rather than take their processes as they had them at the moment, which were very manual, creating documents, compiling them, writing them in Word, emailing them to someone, we later out found that what instead we should have been doing was automate some of those processes, and which we eventually did once we realized that there was a need, whereby, to my much earlier point, we could cut down the lead times for creating or getting certifications and creating all the documentation that was needed for MOT-type tests, where we could cut down that time considerably. So there is one anti-pattern here, or one learning, that if you don't look at the end-to-end value chain, and I really mean end-to-end, as Neha said, from the first idea through everything you do as part of the process of delivering software to getting it in the hand of users and getting feedback in. If we don't consider the end-to-end value chain, we're missing a trick possibly, because we're overlooking a user or a need or something somewhere.
And I'm sure we can all relate to that situation where we've got code that's ready to ship, but the business isn't ready for us to ship that code. It's frustrating for everybody. And that precisely is because we're not thinking end to end. And we have another example from a client where we were building a delivery pipeline using a scripting language, and we chose Bash because it's quite commonly used, and it's certainly quite easy for us to find talented DevOps engineers with skills in Bash. What we found, however, was that although our client was a .NET shop and they had preferences for PowerShell, for example, or Python, they were happy in the initial stages to actually train up their staff. But what we found is that over time, they started to become more and more resistant to the idea of completely retraining their staff. You know, they'd already had a tech strategy, they already had a family of tools and technologies that they'd subscribed to, and their actual local market, in their local market, it was actually very hard to find people with skills in Bash. It was much easier to find people with skills in like PowerShell and other sort of .NET technologies. So that was another anti-pattern that we found where we weren't really user-centric or as user-centric as we could have been. We could have actually really validated much earlier on, is there really an appetite to invest in training? Do the engineers want to retrain and have skills in this other area? Because the engineers themselves didn't really see the value in learning another technology because they saw a longer term future in the company following through on their existing tech strategy.
Talking stakeholders, when we make choices as DevOps engineers or teams, it is important to consider, for instance, hiring practices as well. So suddenly we have the HR department who becomes a stakeholder because they can't resource the team with the respective skills you need. So that is very, very important to consider as well. And this is not something normally we would have on a stakeholder map because HR, that's not really related to anything DevOps does. Right? Final example, again, because this was initially technically driven and in heavily regulated environments, everyone's like, let's focus on the production environment first, because this needs to be secure, this needs to be, performant, and this is where the software will live on. Let's focus on this. So there was a big drive initially to build the most beautiful production environment. The problem, of course, with that is that if you have the most beautiful production environment, but your upstream pipeline isn't really well in place, you have nothing to put on that environment, or you can't get something onto that environment in the right cadence. So the learning there was really, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there was certainly were bottlenecks of getting code into production because of that approach. So really we need to look at what makes sense for the business in that case. The business with an empty, beautiful production environment, there was no value for the business. But what the value would have been for the business to get code from A to B quickly. So these are just three anti-patterns. There are definitely many more, but this shows a little bit why we think that product thinking can help kind of in the DevOps space as well.
And in sort of thinking about like the product toolkits that we use, like essentially there are three main questions that we try to answer in the product world to try to find that ideal sort of product or service, which is right in the middle over there. So we try to find the balance between desirability, viability, and feasibility. And in the case that we're talking about, where we want to have a strategic capability, a strategic DevOps capability, that would be sitting right in the middle. So we need to understand on the desirability side, who are our users, first of all, and does our capability actually meet their needs? The needs of the internal users as well as external users for our company. Would someone actually invest in this capability? And then we've got the viability side, which is thinking not so much about the users, but actually now in terms of the business and the business case. How does this actually make our business stronger? How does it actually move us forward as a business? How will this actually contribute to our longer term success? And this is where, again, like that sort of return on investment conversation starts to come in. Like if we can frame things and say, okay, it's not about moving code into production 5 times a day, but it is about maybe solving user problems this much faster than some of our competitors, it becomes a very different way of kind of looking at the problem. And the last aspect is around feasibility, and this is very much around our internal capabilities and our constraints within our organization, because again, all of our businesses are different. So this is, can we actually do it, and what can we actually do? And if we actually focus on these 3 different areas and we answer these questions, then we end up coming up with something that's actually fit for our needs, for our business, for our context. So we're actually going to go through some of the tools that help answer these 3 types of questions.
We'll do this relatively quickly. This is not about kind of teaching you the use of the tools, just give you an idea of what you could be doing, the tools you could be using. And to be honest, you most likely will have seen all of them. There's nothing new in there. It's just bringing them into maybe possibly a slightly new domain or subdomain. So one tool we use, so I should maybe say this process isn't linear. This process is incremental. It's iterative. It's a cycle here, but the things are a bit more mixed up in reality, or maybe even going on in parallel. The first we use what we call a user map, and we'll show you examples in a second. The user map is basically a stakeholder map to say, okay, who are the users, who are the people we need to consider as part of this initiative. Following from that, we look at the needs, the gains, the pains these users expect, or the pains they have, expectations, requirements, these kind of things. So to understand how can we help, where should we help the users? What are their constraints? A little bit referring to the talk earlier. What are the constraints and the capabilities of those users? For this, we use the value proposition canvas. That then allows us also to build on the needs and the jobs that users want to do and decide what are the capabilities, the system capabilities we want to deliver that satisfy those needs and expectations. As a third step, we then, once we have an idea of features and capabilities we want to build, we of course prioritize those because there is always more stuff we could do that anyone can afford, or certainly our clients could afford. So we prioritize and we express them in story maps, roadmaps. Your backlog will be coming into this. And then once we have built something, we have an experience that customers or users actually use, and we can use experience maps to visualize and model that, and we can use that to generate learnings from that and form further hypotheses on what we should be doing in the future, et cetera, et cetera. There may also be coming new users out of this, and we are back in the circle, basically. We're taking you through quickly, just in the interest of time, through some of those examples now.
Yep, so in the case of a user map, so we find this really useful for just kind of reframing our focus and reminding ourselves of who we're actually delivering value for at the end of the day. And ultimately, the person who's most important is that end user who's actually using our product or our service. So that end user interacts with a couple of people. They interact with sales, marketing, customer support. These are the people directly giving value to that end user. And in there also is our product or our service. So our service is the thing that our users are interacting with daily to kind of solve their problems. Then the next level out, we've got sort of the people who deliver the tools and the processes to actually enable that first group to deliver value to the end user. So this is where we've got probably a lot of people here, so delivery teams. We might have designers, project managers, engineers, etc. And in the earlier example, where we weren't thinking end-to-end value and we weren't thinking about the compliance people internally, compliance would actually be part of the delivery team. They wouldn't be an external stakeholder. They are part of delivering those features to production. And if we put compliance in that delivery team, all of a sudden their needs start to rise up to the top, and we actually start to prioritize their needs as well. And then we sort of have our least favorite part of the organization normally, which is where the governance and the oversight people come in. So this is where we might have external regulators, but we also might have internal project management teams, the board, the C-suite, who are all interested in the accountability and the governance side of things, who we do need to report to as well.
I think it's really important to appreciate that even if we're just thinking of a CI/CD pipeline, that literally everyone on that list has some kind of interest in what's happening on that pipeline, because ultimately if you have a production environment, the end users want to make sure that their personal data is secure and safe on it, right? As a sales and marketing person, I might want to manage a roadmap, which is part of my tooling set that then informs the backlog, which links to stories, etc. down the line. So all of these really have in some shape or form a more loose or a closer relationship to the capabilities of our DevOps tooling and processes. This is a classic business model canvas, a strategizer, value proposition canvas, a strategizer propose it. So for each user we identify on the left-hand side, so here a software engineer, a developer, we identify needs, gains, and pains. So things like, I want to manage my code. I want to understand what I should be working on next. They're worried about promoting bugs down the line. They might have to do rollbacks and want this to be easy. And it would be great if there was very fast feedback on the quality of my code, right? So these things are interesting to them. And then on the right-hand side, we can define features and capabilities of our tooling that delivers against those things.
And then like the next level to kind of bring things even more tangible and focus on what kind of, how do we prioritize, what we actually deliver around our capability. We look at things like story maps, and these are incredibly powerful tools. So what we would do is at the very top, we used to kind of see the pink and the orange is where we have all of the activities that are required in order to do our jobs. So it might be, so we have one example which is from a delivery pipeline. And so the development team basically needed to write code, test locally, deploy to a test environment, automatically run some tests there, then deploy to staging and then to production. So these are all sort of steps. But then there's the ongoing steps as well, which aren't part of that process, things like ongoing monitoring, proactive monitoring, and responding to any alerts that they get. So we'd plot all those sorts of key activities at the top, and then what we do is we kind of turn them almost into features. So we say, with monitoring, you can go really deep or you can go really shallow. So how far you go down with the stories, with the yellow post-its, is kind of how far you go with developing a particular feature. So the approach with a story map is rather than build out an entire feature like a production environment and just a production environment with no tests, no deployment scripts, instead of doing that, we can actually take a horizontal approach and say, actually, let's do a thin slice. Let's set up a very lightweight test environment. Let's set up a staging environment. Let's set up a production environment and deployment scripts, manual deployment scripts to deploy across those environments. And that would be our first release, our first slice. Then the next step after that could be to actually make some of those environments more resilient. And then the next step after that could be, let's say, to add in some more monitoring on production. And that's maybe where we start to scale up the production environment a lot more. So by using a tool like this, we can actually prioritize different business outcomes, and we can actually see what that means in terms of which features we focus on and how far we go with each of those features. And at a single glance, it's actually quite a powerful way of looking at a backlog. I don't know about anybody else here, but generally backlogs are really hard to make sense of because it's just a single list of a gazillion things. Whereas this is quite a beautiful visual way of being able to see how that backlog actually eventually gets delivered.
I think this is a good point in the sense that we can use these things to define what a final product or service should look like, but they're also really good at just managing workload and day-to-day kind of work, because you can look at this as an engineer and you're like, okay, I don't have to worry about row 2 and 3 at the moment. I'm only looking at row 1. These are the features, epics if you like, and I'm only working on those 5 on the right-hand side. So it's a really good way of making sense of complex, complicated things, right? Finally, as we've said, experience maps very quickly. At the top, again, you've got your activities or your journey. Below, where it says workflow and with the blue boxes, you have the detailed steps of the various phases. So you'd have one of those slices, if you like, for each of the activities. So it would be quite big and quite complicated, where you model in detail what's happening, who is doing what, possibly when. And then you can model additional things below. So for instance, sentiment or emotions. In this case, we're saying, well, if someone defines a story, there are certain elements where they don't know anything about it. So there might be they might be not that stressed. Then they get to know how complex this is. Stress goes up. Stress goes down when the story is written, but then it might go up again when they're like, oh, I need to get this approved. Now, have I done this right? Below, we can again map jobs to be done, needs, pains and gains, as we've seen previously. And then we can also map the various technical capabilities we need to satisfy all these things. What we then can do is we can look at this and we can say, where are the, basically run a SWOT analysis over this, where we can say, where are the weaknesses, the gaps, the strength in this, and then decide whether we want to solve those or build on top of one of those things or not.
So essentially, this is really about treating it like a product.
Yeah, I mean, product or service design, really. That's kind of our point, that sometimes, as I said before, this is such a technical discipline historically, and it really makes sense to bring this up a little bit to the point of treating it like a product or service. Now, if you are interested in, especially some of the tooling we've mentioned, we've recently written a playbook which is about Inception. So Inception is like how you kick projects off in a better way, which we've also used for DevOps-related initiatives. But this playbook has a lot of those tools explained, and we link off to further resources online. That's freely available on playbook.ee. If you wait a couple of weeks, there will be a version 2 coming out as well. That might be better to read, but this, as I said, is freely available. And then in addition to that, I mean, we're available through the usual channels. We podcast about agile product stuff. We blog about it, and yeah, just get in touch with us if All right, any questions?
I mean, we'd really actually love to hear from any of you if you have any questions about anything that we've spoken about today, and if you actually have used or you are planning on using any of these sorts of tools, we'd love to hear about it.
Cool.
And that's it.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.